Alright guys, so in this video I'm going to show you how to fetch data from an external API using Ajax. Now, we've already looked at just getting a text file and bringing it in asynchronously, getting a JSON file. Usually you're going to be dealing with some kind of API, whether that's your own API. If you build your own backend and you're building full stack applications, you'll have your own API to work with. But often you'll also work with external APIs, such as this one that we're going to be working with, which is just a very, very simple API that takes a GET request formatted as a certain URL and then will return Chuck Norris jokes, just random Chuck Norris jokes. And you can get a single joke, you can get multiple jokes, you can limit the category. I'm going to talk more about APIs and REST APIs in the next video, but basically every API is different. Okay, so how it takes requests, how it responds, it's all different, and they all have their own documentation. All right, if you're working with something external that's not your own. So if we go down here, this is actually icndb.com/API, and you can see we can fetch a random joke, for example, by saying /joke/random, and the response will be, what is this? The response will be the type, which if everything goes okay, it'll be success, and then the value will have the actual joke object. All right, now you can fetch random or multiple random jokes, which is what we'll be doing by just adding on a slash and then the number. All right, now we're actually going to build an application that has a form where you can set the number of jokes you want. It'll make the request and it will return that number of Chuck Norris jokes. All right, now when you're dealing with a GET request, you can just make it right in your browser. So if we grab this URL right here and we go and paste that in, we get a random Chuck Norris joke, and every time I reload, it's going to be a different joke. Okay, now if you want to get more than one, you can just say slash, let's say 5, and it'll give us 5 Chuck Norris jokes. All right, so we're going to use Ajax to build this application that will go out and get these jokes, return them, and then we'll display them in the browser using the DOM techniques that we've already discussed in this course. All right, so let's get started. So as you can see, I have my index.html, just the basic HTML layout, and I'm including skeleton CSS right here through the CDN, and then I just have a div with the class of container, and we're including the app.js file, which is completely empty. All right, so I'm actually going to change the title to Chuck Norris Joke Generator. And then in the container, let's go ahead and build out our UI, which is going to be very, very simple. It's just a simple form. So let's say form. We don't need an action. Okay, in our form, we'll have a div. And in the div, we'll have a label. And this is going to be the number. So we'll say number. Or let's do number of jokes. And then under that, we'll have an input, and let's do a type of number. That way they can't enter any, letters or anything like that. And it doesn't need a name, but for the ID, we're going to say number. Okay, and that's the only actual input. Now we just need a button, so I'm going to put a div here and just put a button in. Let's give it a class of get-jokes, and then we'll just say get jokes. Okay, now we need a place for the jokes to render, so we're going to go under the form, and I'm just going to put a UL with the class of jokes and save. Okay, actually let's put a heading right above the form, so we'll say H2 and we'll say Chuck Norris jokes or joke generator. Okay. So let's go to our app.js file, and we're going to be using DOM techniques that we've already learned. We need to first, let's grab the button because we need an event listener for when that's clicked. That's when we want something to happen. So we're going to say document.getElementById, and let's see, we gave it an ID, right? The button. No, we gave it a class, so we're actually going to use query selector. All right, so query selector, and we gave it a class, so it's going to be dot and then it's what was it, get dash jokes. Okay, we want to just add an event listener, and we want to listen for a click, and then we want to call a function called get jokes. Okay, so let's create that function. And in here, just to test it out, we'll do a console log. All right, and let's just prevent the default behavior here. We'll just say e.prevent default. All right, so now if I go ahead and click get jokes, let's see, oh, I didn't pass in the event. Okay, so now we just get console log get jokes. So we need to grab this, whatever is put in here, we need the number of jokes. So let's go ahead and create a variable called number. And we'll set this to document.query selector. And there's only one input, so we could actually just put input, but just to be more specific, I'm going to use the brackets here, and I'm going to say type equals number. So this will grab just the number input type. And then we want the value, so we'll say dot value. All right, and if we want to check that out, we can say console log number. And then if we go over here and put in 4 and submit, you can see we get 4. All right, so now that we have the number, we can prepare our XHR request or our AJAX request. So let's create a variable called XHR, and we're going to set this equal to new XML HTTP request. Okay, create the object. Then we're going to call xhr.open. Now, instead of putting a file name in here like we've been doing, we're going to put the actual URL. Now, we want to fetch multiple random jokes, so this is the format we need right here. So we can copy this, put it in there, except we don't want to hard code the 3. We want whatever this number is. So actually what I'm going to do is use backticks here. So we can use a template literal, and then replace the 3 with the dynamic number that's being passed in. Okay, so we also want to set this to true because we want to make sure that it's actually asynchronous. And another thing I forgot is the request, which is get. Okay, and then down here we'll do xhr.send. All right, so what do we want to do when we actually get this data? That's what goes in the onload. So xhr onload equals function, and then we want to check to make sure it's a 200 status, make sure it actually came back okay. So we'll say this, meaning the xhr object dot status is equal to 200, whoops, not 2000, and then let's do const response, and we're going to set this to this dot response text, like that. All right, and let's go ahead and console.log the response. All right, and let's go over here and let's put in 4 and get jokes, and then we're logging the response we get. Now this is a JSON string. What we want to do is basically take this JSON string that we're getting, and we want to turn it into an object that we can actually do things to, like loop through, things like that. So we need to wrap this response text that we get back in the JSON.parse function, like that. All right, so now if we say 4, and now you can see it's in a different format. It's in an actual object, and it has a type, which is success, and it has the value, which is an array of the joke objects. Okay, and they're completely random. Every time we submit the form, we'll get different jokes. All right, so the process of actually getting it from the API is complete. Now we just want to work on putting it inside of the DOM. All right, so what I'm going to do here is initialize a variable called output, just set it to nothing, and then we want to loop through. Actually, the first thing we should do is make sure the type is actually success. So we can say if, let's say if response dot type is equal to success, then we can continue. All right, else, let's put an else here. Else, then I'm going to set that output variable, and we want to append. I'm just going to put an li in here, and we'll say something went wrong. All right, so if it is success, then what do we want to do? We want to loop through this array and then put each iteration, each joke, inside of this output. We want to append to it, and we append using plus equals. So let's go ahead and loop through it. We'll use a for each, so we'll say response dot. Now this is important right here. I'm not going to do response for each because the response is an object. Okay, it's an object that has type and value. So we're not going to loop through an object with this type and value. We want to loop through the value which holds the array. So we're going to say response.value.forEach. And this is what I mean when I say that APIs, they're all formatted differently. You might have another API that will actually return the array as the response. That way you can just say response.forEach. So it all depends on how the API is formatted. Okay, whether it's your own or whether it's an external one like this. Hopefully that makes sense. So let's go ahead and add our callback here, and for each one we'll just say joke, and then for each iteration what we want to do is take that output variable and we want to append an li. Actually, I'm going to use backticks here. So an li, and then inside of it we want the joke. So again, if we look at the value, we're going to want joke, okay, which represents the current iteration, dot, and then whatever we want here, we can get the ID, we can get the categories, which is another array, and we can get the joke. The joke is what we want, so we're going to say joke.joke. Okay, and that should do it. Now, nothing's going to happen yet. If we submit it, we need to actually insert the HTML down here. So we're going to go outside of the if statement right here, and we're going to say document.querySelector, and remember we have that output class. What was it right here? UL class jokes. So we're going to say class jokes and then .inner HTML, and we're going to set that to that output variable. So let's save. Let's go ahead and say we want 3 jokes and get jokes, and there we go. Okay, if we do 5, it'll be 5 random jokes. All right, if we do 20, get jokes, and it gives us 20. So that's our little application, and this gives you a good example of how to use Ajax to work with an external API. Now, a lot of external APIs, really intricate ones, you'll need some kind of authentication, okay? And usually that's using something like OAuth, and that can get quite complicated. I'm not going to get into that, but just know that not all APIs, public APIs, are as give you as much freedom as they do here. A lot of times you'll have to register. You'll have to actually register your application with their system so they know that, look, this application you're building is using this API, and then you have to authenticate. Sometimes you'll have a certain number of requests. For instance, the GitHub API, you'll get like, I think it's 100 requests per hour unless you go and register your application with them, and then you get an API key and you have to include that in your URL, and then you can do unlimited requests. So like I said, different rules for different APIs. All right, so that's it, guys. In the next video, we're going to talk more about APIs and specifically REST or RESTful APIs, and as well as other types of HTTP requests, because up to this point, we've only been using GET. All right, so I will see you in the next lecture.